This podcast is sponsored by NHS Lancashire and South Cumbria Integrated Care Board and Beacon Counselling Trust, promoting an open discussion about gambling-related harm and the destruction it can cause. If you're affected by anything you hear and would like to reach out, visit beaconcounsellingtrust.co.uk. Let's keep talking.
Welcome back to Football Untold, the podcast that explores the dark side of the beautiful game. Thanks once again for checking us out. We're on to episode 5 of the series so far. Actually, we're going to do things a little bit different in this episode because we're going to talk about the stigma that exists around talking about addiction, both within the game and then across society more openly. When we say stigma, we mean views held that maybe hold people back and stop people getting help. We've heard from each of the lads about how they all left it maybe a little too late to avoid the worst effects of addiction. So how can we change that so that footballers today and people in general know how and when to get help? Once again, we've got the boys in the studio. Mr. Clarke, Carlisle, I will start with you if that's okay. And I'll also make the point that people will hear about the services that are available across the course of the podcast as well, because the signposting around this is really important. Stigma is the thing that basically means I can't talk about this. I have to keep this to myself, because if I do express something about it, negative things will come my way. And that can't be a good thing when we're talking about something so devastating as gambling addiction. There's got to be a point where we've got to push through that, lower those limits so people feel like they can come forward and have a conversation about gambling.
I totally agree, mate. And when we talk about stigma, it's quite an ethereal thing. You know, it's like, there is a huge stigma with regards to this issue in a workplace. What does that actually mean in reality? Well, there is no workplace that says you can't talk about this. What happens is someone goes into a workplace, and because of the things that they see, because of the actions and responses that they witness, they believe that they can't talk about this. Now, that's very different. It's very different not being allowed to talk about something to believing that you can't talk about something. And that's what we have to change. So we have to constantly and consistently evidence that it is okay to talk about things. Not only is it okay, you're expected to talk about certain things. So that's the way that we're going to have to address and unpackage it in the workplace. And
can I give you an example, though?
Yeah, go on,
Simon Haworth's in the studio as well. But say you came in today, you were playing five-a-side, right? I'll rip you for this later on, don't worry. But you were saying over your knee, like straight away you were like, look at the state of my knee. Yeah. Clarke, last week, a week before, you had an ankle issue, and you talked about it almost like straight away. And I think people will do that, don't they? When they go, "How are you feeling today?" And you will go, "I've had this cold for ages now." And all those physical things are quite normal, aren't they?
Yeah.
To talk about, but actually, those mental health things, be it addictions or depression or any of those things, we keep all of those inside, don't we? We'll gladly tell someone that we injured ourselves, particularly for you, because you're playing for the first time in 10 years and you wanted everyone to know about it.
Yeah, I think certainly from a male perspective, there's a big ego thing in that, isn't there? Can I admit my flaws? Can I look at myself? Men just want to do what they think is right in front of their peers, etc., etc. So I think it's something, the more education we can get out there, the more we talk about it, hopefully that'll make people more comfortable to actually talk about it. But it's about when somebody feels right to do it, Mick, because it's talking about gambling here, to say to yourself, I'm flawed in this respect, or I'm flawed in that respect, or I'm in this mess, I'm in this. It's not easy, I think, from a male perspective, to go and speak to somebody. Like Clarke says, nobody's stopping you do that. It's an inner barrier, if you like.
But in terms of, and I think you touched on this as well, in terms of your own experience, that knowledge that you've got a problem, even before you realise or you can identify it as addiction, you must become aware that things are getting away from you, to the point where I think as a gambler, and maybe I'm right or maybe I'm wrong on this one, you have to sort of present yourself as being someone in the know, someone who has the inside track, somebody. And I wonder whether or not part of the issue around the stigma around this is you have to admit at some point that you're not the guy in the know and you don't have the inside track, and you maybe didn't have the knowledge you thought you have. So there's a second level that you've got to overcome before you kind of accept, okay, this has gone a little bit too far.
Yeah, you can become that guy that has a tip, that guy that's known to be at the races. For me, I was known as coming into work with the Racing Post, I'll know, and are you going here, are you going there? So there's an extra barrier, if you like, and I was out scouting a game not long ago, and I'd seen somebody at a club from a long time ago, and how's the horses? Have you had any winners? And in that 10-year period, they hadn't realised where I was at, so I had to tell them. But that isn't comfortable for some people to still talk about it in that way. And you're right, yeah, it's not an easy thing to overcome.
Can I ask what you said? Did you say, no, I don't do that anymore? Or?
Yeah, I said I don't do it anymore. Problem gambler, went through it, and I'm comfortable doing that, but there's still big issues for people to come out and do that. I mean, we've recognised that from speaking to people about maybe coming on the podcast. Some people think they're ready and they're not ready, and they're still probably not well, if you like, and not ready to do that. So it's a difficult one, because you want to encourage people to speak a lot sooner in the journey, if you like, and help them get some help before they get to the end of that. But it isn't easy, and I just think it comes with education and losing some of that stigma, which is what we're talking about.
I think there's something we've got to acknowledge about gambling that draws a huge distinction between, let's say, anxiety and depression, or the parallel you're drawing with physical ailments. If something happens to your physical body, it has happened to you. You can share that. It's something, that has inconvenienced, or is a consequence of something external. We're getting to the point of understanding that anxiety and depression is something. It takes a form of an illness. It happens to you. But with gambling, the way that it's positioned, people gamble for fun, but by the time it's gotten to the point where it's causing you severe consequences, the reflection is on you. It's that I am engaging in a bad behaviour. I've been naughty. I am wrong. Now, that's a very different dynamic to have to share with someone. It's not, oh, this has happened to me. Can you, understand and help? Oh, yeah, of course I can. But if it's gambling, it's like, oh, actually, I've been bad. I've been naughty. I've done something wrong. So it's almost a confession as opposed to sharing, an affliction of sorts. Now, that very different dynamic means that I'm not going to share it in my workplace. There is absolutely no chance that I'm going to go into work and say, I've been bad, I've been naughty. But what we have to point these people to are the safe spaces where they can make that admission, if that makes sense, So there's another point here where I actually don't think that people should go into their workplace every day. And if if I say, how are you say, well, actually, Clarke, I've got a gambling addiction. I don't think that's right, because when you're in your workplace, there are professional boundaries. You're there to do a job. But it's kind of in tandem with that, the work and the environment that you're in must facilitate the opportunity for you to access a safe space where you can say that. Now, that's what we've got to point everyone who's currently experiencing it towards, and we've got to point organisations towards. Like, look, we know you, Bauer Media as a company, we don't expect you to fix Mick Coyle's psychological problems. We don't expect you to ask him to talk about them at work, but we do expect you to provide the facility for him to be able to talk about those things. That is within your remit. So that's the kind of change in the whole direction of supporting someone with adverse mental health, but especially gambling, where it's almost a confession of personal action. That's where we need to create that safe space and point people to it.
I think that's dead interesting, and I think it's worth pointing out, the later stages of this series of the podcast, we spoke to a lot of people, Si, who talked about their stories and were keen to get involved, as you made the point before, but then held back. And actually, it's definitely worth saying that the way to tackle a gambling addiction isn't on day one to announce it, on day two to publicly declare it in a podcast. Let's make that absolutely clear, that those conversations, and you guys have been, along your journeys, and you're at the point in your journeys where you're able to talk about that. But we do want to say to people that it's about finding those spaces, and that can be the anonymous helplines, that can be reaching out to that phone number or that website and getting that support in that place. I think as much as anything, I wonder, because a lot of people don't almost have the language. We don't have the language, do we, to say I've failed, or I've been bad, or I've done the wrong thing. It's quite a complex thing to get your head around. And of course, if you've not come from that space, or you culturally don't understand that, you've never seen other people do it before, how would you know? We've never been taught that that's how you approach the negative aspects of your own life. I certainly didn't have lessons in that growing up, and that's going to be the experience of so many people listening to this and beyond, that they'll go, well, what is that first step? What does that first step look like?
It's like Clarke said, it's finding that safe place as well, because you think of the gambler that's looking at themselves, they'll get to that stage where everybody else is telling them they've got a problem, but they deny it, and then they start to go, I think I've got a problem, I don't like what I'm seeing. But who do they talk to? Because a lot of the people around them will be affected by their gambling anyway. So do you go to your wife, who knows there's an issue, or there maybe you've been lying to her, that's not comfortable. I've borrowed off a friend or stolen off a family member, I can't go to them. So it's finding that place where you can take what you need to say and go and deliver it in a comfortable, safe space. And as you said, there's no practice to that. We're not taught what to do. And anyone that's had an initial therapy or first time in a GA, it's daunting. And a lot of the time it takes you to get to a really dark place or breaking point to do that. We're trying to educate people to say it's safe and it's okay to do that a lot sooner. So we haven't got people, if you like, on the edge of the cliff of that journey.
Can you say to someone, Clarke, in a dressing room, Hi mate, I've noticed your behaviour's gone a certain way, or I've noticed the gambling thing's picked up a little bit, within a football dressing room? Could that conversation it'd have to come from a very senior place, but how would that, can that play out in conversations in dressing rooms?
I was talking about this today, and in football, it's such a hierarchical structure that you have to have a certain amount of presence and I don't know what's the word I would look for, seniority within a dressing room to be able to directly intervene in someone's actions, or let's say, we're talking about culture, try and establish a different norm within a dressing room. If you're anything between the age of 16, and 25, nothing that you say is going to have any clout with anyone in the dressing room. Not because of the veracity of what you're saying or the good intentions behind it, but because you haven't proven yourself in this dressing room. So there are so many reasons why attempts for intervention are going to fail. I have done it before, and I've done it from a place of compassion, but most importantly, I've done it from a place of where I had been there and the other person knew. So they didn't take offence at what I said. And the way that I always phrase it is, I would see that. I've experienced that before and it caused me a problem. How is it for you? So it's not like, oh, you're doing wrong. It's like, hey, I've done that, but when I was doing it, it was a real issue for me. Do you resonate with that? And I think that was a good way to break the ice.
I think that's a really simple way of talking, but actually just hearing it, Clarke say it out loud, makes me go, oh yeah, you would hear that and you would understand it without thinking, how dare this guy say this? Because actually what you're doing, you're offering something of yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're doing it empathetically.
Yeah, I think there's still conversations for senior staff within that. If we're talking about a football environment, if you like, members of staff, people beyond that, even at director and board level, because I still think, we talked about it in one of the other episodes, lads still fear that, am I going to be dropped? Am I going to be discarded? Am I going to be thrown to one side? So I think there can be a better conversation for education of managers and coaches and board members in regards to that, because I'm still not 100% convinced people wouldn't be judged for that if they don't go to the right person at the right time within that club.
This podcast is sponsored by NHS Lancashire and South Cumbria Integrated Care Board and Beacon Counselling Trust. If you'd like to reach out, visit beaconcounselingtrust.co.uk.
We're talking Stigma then on Football Untold on episode 5 of the series. Oh, Stephen Colker's here, by the way. He's back. Steve, great to see you. Thanks for swinging by once again. Steve's episode, by the way, is available episode 4. It's a really fascinating insight into the life of Stephen Colke and the place he's at now and the way he looks back on his journey. So do check that out. You can subscribe to all the podcasts. So you touched on before finding the words to try and break the stigma, and about the fact that some people don't even have the language to do so. Can you remember that first conversation and who it was with, where you kind of went, look, that big plan I had to be, a horse racing tipster and all that kind of stuff, it's all gone wrong. Can you remember what that was?
Yeah, my conversation with a good friend. And at first, even that conversation, whilst I felt comfortable, I was still trying to defend a little bit of it until we got into deeper conversations. So I was still going there with that ego in place, I guess. But as the conversation went, I opened up. and I had to look inside myself a little bit during the conversation. And I think luckily, the friend I did speak to was great in that situation. I think if he wouldn't have been, and it was the wrong person I went to, I may have kept being in denial with that. But luckily that opened up, and then obviously the next conversation was with the PFA, somebody there, and then went on to counselling and all the help you get through the PFA. But the initial one was with a close friend who, like I said, hadn't had any problems himself, but it seemed to work for me. Felt a safe place to go, and he helped break down a few of them barriers that I still had up at the beginning of the conversation.
Did it feel, or does it feel at that point like you're admitting, or you're having to, or feel like you're admitting that you're failed as like an individual? I mean, this is a part of someone's life. It might be a big part of their lives, but it's only a part. It doesn't define, hopefully, someone's entire existence. How did that frame within your mind? Was that you admitting that plan had gone wrong, or that side of your life, or did it feel like there was more to it?
I still felt like a failure within that. That still seemed to me like I wasn't good enough. I was a failure. I'd got things wrong, and etc. etc. So, you know, that was a tough conversation for me to admit. I think you spend a long time as an addict knowing it's the wrong thing. You're beating yourself up. There's a long process, or there was for me, of knowing it was bad. I didn't like what I was doing, the lying, the deceit, everything else that comes with it. But then being able to actually get that out and speak to someone and admit you don't like the person you are, and look at all your flaws and the things you've done. It's not an easy thing to do. It really isn't. And that was the challenge for me. I'd spent enough time looking within myself, thinking, I don't like this guy. He's got a problem. He's this, he's that. But who do I tell? And who's going to, again, maybe from the football background, who's going to say it's okay and give me a pat on the back for it? Still looking for that affirmation of it almost. So that's kind of how it was for me.
Steve, in terms of yourself, when you're in those sort of cycles of the habit kicks in, and it comes with like a journey. You talked about the fact, you know, it involved getting on a plane and going to, you know, to Cyprus to take part in casinos over there. When you were getting on that plane, were you thinking, oh, what am I doing getting on this plane? Or were you thinking, here we go? At the start, does it feel like it's going to be a good trip, that good things can come from that moment? And then does it descend at that point?
Always feels like it's going to be a good trip. Always. I always guided with a belief that I'm going to win and I'm going to win the jackpot. You know, that's always how it started. How it ended was with me curled up, hungover, on a flight. Don't want to speak to anyone, hood up, just praying that no one recognises me and starts a conversation regarding anything to do with football or anything, full stop, really. It was just a really sort of brutal time, but always started with a hope, with a belief.
Even like the next time. So would you then deliberately forget that negative the next time it was happening?
I wouldn't say it's deliberate. I'd say it's just part of the illness. You know what I mean? It just naturally happens. I just forget that I lose every time, basically, because I'm a compulsive gambler. So even when I win, I can't walk away. So there is no logic to me gambling. You know, I've had crazy sums of money on the table in the green, and I've continued to play because that's what I do. All it ever is just more money to gamble.
And in terms of that conversation, I know you've had sort of different managers you've got on with, managers that you maybe haven't, you know, had that same sort of relationship with. Was it someone within the game that you talked about your problems, or was it someone outside of the game where that really sort of took off?
No, someone outside of the game, for sure. I mean, look, I know there's a lot of conversations around speaking to coaches, speaking to player care, speaking to the psychologists at the club. For me, I never advise any young player to do that. And I know that may be insulting to a few people, and I apologise to the people that are offended, but it's just my experience. It's my truth. You know, what's happened in my life, in my experiences, those who I've told within football have used it against me. So, you know, I'm not going to stand there and tell a youngster to go and do that. I would say, look, outside of the club, I can even guide you for support and help. You know, the same people that help me, I give to them, and that seems to work. I would love for football to change, but I don't think it's going to happen overnight.
That's exactly what you were saying. It's about that pathway has got to exist, hasn't it? And actually, for some it will look like path A, for some it will be path B, but we might be C, D, E, F, G, H, and beyond down the line before someone goes, this is the thing which is right for me. And I'm not talking about they try it for a bit and then it stops. I'm talking about getting through that first door, that first step. Those options have got to be open. So you think, well, I might go down the route of the might be the PFA, or it might be Gamblers Anonymous or the Sporting Chance, or one of those sort of institution-type organisations. But it might be a conversation with someone within a club, but it might be someone within your community. It might be a family member. It could be a lot of different people.
It's one of the greatest difficulties in addressing it, especially within football, because football likes single-strand solutions. They want, this is the answer, it's going to work for everyone. Well, unfortunately, when we're talking about addressing problem behaviours, addressing mental health issues, there are 7 billion people, which means there are 7 billion different solutions. What's worked for Corks may not work for me, although we do have a lot of resonance and similarities that have gone on in our experiences. To find out what works for every individual is time-consuming and it's costly. And football clubs haven't got the time and don't want to spend the money on making you better if they know that they can spend less money and buy someone in who is, isn't presenting any of the problems that you're presenting them with. And that's why that stigma persists in a dressing room. I said it at the top of the show. Stigma is about what I perceive will be your response if I share something with you. And the reason I get that is from the evidence that I see from what's happened before. And Cook, so what was the response of football when you shared publicly what was going on with your drinking and gambling?
Well, it wasn't very good, as I can tell you. I spent, I went back to QPR. What went down there is I can't disclose it, but following on from my time at QPR, I was then out of football for best part of a year. Dundee was my only option. And then following on from that, 70-odd teams had told me no, so that I wasn't allowed back in the changing room, even on trial.
So that this is a guy who's got international caps, who's played an incredible amount of games. He's got such quality and calibre and experience, but because he's voiced one period of adversity that he's managing, he's now untouchable for 72 of the 92 clubs. That's utterly absurd. That evidences to the wider footballing community. I know that there will have been hundreds of players who are maybe going through, difficulties at that point, and they know Corks, they know the player he is, they know his experience, and then they're looking in the summer and they're like, this guy can't get a club. He can't get a club in England, all because he's shared, what he's going through. Why am I going to do that? Because I haven't got any international caps. I didn't play 40 games last season. What's the likelihood that football's going to look after me? So if that's the perception, no wonder guys are feeling the stigma and they're not reaching out.
And actually, and this is a really important point, that actually from a footballing point of view, as a section of society, there will be footballers with a gambling problem because there are people across wider society with a gambling problem. But actually what we've touched on there is something we'll probably explore, Si, in the next episode, about whether or not actually there are specifics to football there that's almost a little bit institutionalized, things that we can do something about, or things that we can highlight, things that we can hold a mirror up to and say, look, this is happening. This is the experience of players within the game today.
I mean, firstly, I agree with Corks. I don't think senior staff, coaches, managers, and with Corks, I don't think you can go to them. I don't think they're educated enough and aware of it and in a position where they really want to help you. I'm still quite, aggressive towards that. I don't think the help is there. I think they want to tick the box and look like it is, but I'm not so sure it is. But it needs to be. It doesn't for a young player to not be able to go to his manager or his coach or his player liaison and get the right response is really disappointing. But I believe it isn't right. Some clubs may, so if I've got it wrong, but in general, I still think there's a stigma amongst them first and foremost. And outside in the bigger world, be interesting, Mick, from listeners and what feedback we get. Does it happen in the corporate world? I'd suggest it does. There may be some that have got their shop in order and things are a lot better, but I'd imagine you'll get similar environments, especially in male-dominated environments.
Well, I'll just ask you one last question, Steve. You mentioned when we shared your story about being 12, 13, then 15, being in rehab at 19. What age for you is the age that young players, male and female, should sit down and be told about what might be coming their way? Because from your point of view, if it had been 17, it would have been way too late. But equally, you might say, well, do you do it with 11 and 12-year-olds? What age for you is the right sort of age that you would sit down with young people, young professionals probably within football clubs and say, here are some pits that are going to come your way. Here's how to recognise them and not fall into them.
I think it's a tough question because the answer would actually go back to what Clarke said about, everyone is different. So I think you could have told me at 15 and I'd have gone whatever. But in my mind, it probably wouldn't have sunk in. You know what I mean? Whereas you could tell some 15-year-olds and they'll be like, wow, I don't want to go anywhere near that. So I think it's possible to put an age on it. I think for me, you'd have to probably go as young as 12. You would actually have to go as young as that age to sort of maybe make an impact. And even then, I don't know how I would have reacted. But I just want to sort of go back on something Si said there. It's actually probably a question for you actually is, we talk there about the clubs and the clubs having to, you can't trust them or whatever's going on, right? But how can they? Like, how can they do better? You understand? Like, this is the point for me is like, because I've sounded like maybe that I'm sort of digging at the clubs. Well, after 70 clubs told me no, and all that. But actually, do they have the time? Do the managers nowadays have the time to go, you know what, I'm going to take care of Stephen Clarke. I'm going to take time out my day to take care of him because they're under pressure. They're about, you see it now, managers get sacked after 3 or 4 games. So is it just it's the club's problem or is it a we problem?
I think it's a bit of a we problem. I think that there definitely has to be more education there. Again, I know people are going out and doing talks and different things, and quite often the staff will be, we haven't got time to sit in on that lived experience chat and things like that. And I think they need to. But as Clarke said, sometimes it's financially easier to replace somebody. But there's got to be that player care thing. Maybe we go beyond the manager and look at board level because they sign a lot of the checks to this, don't they? Can we educate them in helping somebody? It's no point just replacing people. There's got to be a bigger picture and a bigger care. There's enough money in the game, I think, to take care of players better than that. And I do still think it's disappointing if a young boy, 18, 19, 20, can go to somebody within the staff or above that and not say he's got a problem without thinking, that's the end of my contract, that's the end of my involvement in the first team. I just think we have to move on from that. I just think we do.
I tell you what, there's plenty to get into. We'll get into that as part of the live show. We'll do the next episode, which is available same time next week. You can check out the Football Untold podcast feed. Thanks for your streams and thanks for your download for this series so far. We've got another edition of the podcast to come. Thanks to Simon Haworth, to Clarke Carlisle, and Stephen Clarke for this week's edition. Don't forget you can drop your social media messages using the hashtag FootballUntold and head to the website footballuntold.co.uk.
This podcast is sponsored by NHS Lancashire and South Cumbria Integrated Care Board and Beacon Counselling Trust, promoting an open discussion about gambling-related harm and the destruction it can cause. If you've been affected by anything you've heard and would like to reach out, visit beaconcounsellingtrust.co.uk. Let's keep talking.